Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to be back. We usually start in like September, but we're late to the game. Eric and Rebecca have been super busy, but I have no excuse. I'm just lazy. So that's where we're at. I do apologize. We were scheduled with Dr. Solomon and he hasn't come, and I'm sure it's probably some misunderstanding on my part, but we've been waiting kind of see if he's going to show up. And we've sent some emails and are trying to get in touch with him. So if you're really excited to see him, I apologize already, and you guys can go about your business. We are going to chat for a little bit and maybe catch up and maybe talk a little bit about what's going on in New York. And if he shows up, then that would be great. If not, we would look to reschedule. Originally, I had told him 8 o'clock and then said, oh no, it's 7 o'clock. So he probably maybe got 8 o'clock stuck in his head. And so maybe that's what he's thinking, but we're just all over the place. So thank you though for checking in with us. My name is Rachel. I'm a school psychologist in Maryland. I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca though to introduce herself. Rebecca.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca. I'm a school psychologist currently in Florida. And I hope that even though we may have our guest soon, or we may not, I'm not sure. I hope you do participate. You're here hopefully because you're interested in the subject and the topic of math reform and advocacy for evidence-based math practices. So we would still love to hear from you. So please say hi in the chat. If you're signed into your YouTube account, you can comment right alongside the video. And even if you joined late and not exactly on time live, you can still comment. It links up to the time in the conversation in the video, and we can see those comments and respond either right now or over time. Also, we're still on our social media channels on Facebook, on the School Psyched Facebook page, and School Psyched Your School Psychologist, which we've posted about tonight's event, and we always post about upcoming podcasts. So please feel free to comment there. You can inbox message us if you would like to have a more private conversation, because the comments you make on the video do remain live with, along the video over time. And also you can find us on Blue Sky, Becca Kamiz at Blue Sky, and at Becca Kamiz on Threads as well, where I did post tonight. I'm also getting my posting muscles rewarmed up again for this season. But please feel to comment and repost and share all of your thoughts and all of the episodes that you like, and anything that you have. We're interested to hear from you. And so now I would typically pass it over to Eric to introduce our guest, but let's have Eric introduce yourself and tell us how you've been. It's been a while.
Thank you, Rebecca. We're just getting back to it. I'm sort of like you two. I'm just kind of getting my podcast feet settled again. So it's been a busy school year, and I'm Eric Elias, school psychologist in Connecticut, and it's been a busy month. I've been at a few state association conferences over the weekends. We had our Connecticut State Association conference last week, Arizona's this weekend, and then Washington State, which I presented virtually a few weeks ago. And then New York is coming up next weekend. Or Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So busy time, but super excited to be back with our podcast team and to talk about some important things. And I love that already we have a listener, Ms. Jules 888, has commented asking if we can have the dyslexia speaker come back on. I love that idea. And tonight we'll try to talk a little bit about the math concerns that our guest hopefully will get him later on and can reschedule or whatever we need to do.
I have an update. I got an email. He just slipped his mind, but in 5 minutes he's planning on being on. So yay!
Fantastic. So we'll be here with Dr. Solomon. But if you have any topics that are super important to you in the field of psychology, school psychology, mental health, please send us a note or put a note in the chat, and we'd love to consider what we can do. So Yeah, another thought from Ms. Jules 888 about language-based specific learning disabilities. So fantastic. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and
that
this
impacts
might be
us.
good. This might be good that we don't have a guest for a little bit because we can take kind of some feedback from people because we are in
Yes.
the process of scheduling. So this is all good input. So if people have other topics or guests in mind, like just put them in the chat. Like that's awesome.
Yes, we'd love
Yeah.
to hear from your suggestions. And if you know people, mentors, speakers that have come to your district, or authors of books that you've read that you'd like to have us interview from a school psych perspective, please let us know, because we'd love to make connections and ask, because we get great ideas from you all.
But I hope that everybody's having a good start to the school year. I'll say that on my end, I'm like super busy with transfers, lots of transfers that come in with no testing and a million hours of counseling services. And so I'm just kind of in the midst of that right now. And Rebecca, you're in, a different situation. What's going on in your world?
Well, I'm really in a good place right now. I'm in my 4th year of the doctoral program, which means I have successfully defended my dissertation, which is really exciting. That was very stressful, but also weirdly enjoyable. I really loved it. And then I have applied to my internship, my APA internship sites for next fall. So next year will be my internship year. And so my applications are in, and so I'm just going to wait to hear. And that whole process is something we should talk about. I don't know if any of our school psych friends out there are in school right now or applying. It's really stressful. And for people who are younger than they consider moving. They consider going to all different states and things. And I don't know that I have that flexibility. So it feels even more stressful to me. But I guess it's what we sign up for when we decide to to go to a program. A little different than my internship experience as a school psych, because any public school district, I believe, was NASP approved, as long as it was approved by the university program. So I just got to apply to schools that I was interested in my area. And it just seemed like there were potentially a lot more options. But this whole match system is very different and very nerve-wracking. But that's where I am.
I was going to ask about that because I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear about like the match system until I feel like I was in Texas and we had somebody who was going through that, and she explained it to me, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I wasn't sure if that's always been like that for your doctoral folks, or if that's more, but if that's more new, but it seems super stressful and I can't even imagine. Can you give us like a quick overview of like what the match thing is?
Yeah, so you look at the internship positions that are available through the APA internship website. And then if you're interested in a particular program in a particular place, you apply, and then you rank those different positions that you apply to in order of your first choice. So you rank them, and they recommend applying like up to 20, which is also pretty expensive, just like applying to colleges. There's always a fee, but they suggest, the university suggests, I think 14 really is more realistic, but up to 20. And so you apply, you rank them, and so then the programs get hundreds of applications. They select like 4 interns a year, sometimes in some places more. But so then they, when they get those hundreds of applications, they make a list of people that they want to offer an interview to. And then you interview, and if your interview goes well, they rank you according to the people that they like. And if their ranking matches where you ranked them, then you have the opportunity to go there. In fact, once you match, it's binding. So I think if you rank that site the same and they rank you, then you have to go. So you don't want, I thought of it more as like a job interview. Well, if they offer me the position, then I will consider it, kind of thing. But it's not like that at all. So it really restricts your applications to where you would absolutely go if you could. Yeah.
All right, and here is our guest. Welcome. I'm not hearing you right now, so your microphone. See, normally we are able to do some of this off camera, but you get the pleasure of joining mid live stream. So sorry for the pressure. There we are.
I'm so sorry about that.
It's all good. We're so
No
glad.
worries. No worries.
Yes.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I think oh, we've got a little echo going on. I'm not quite sure why that's happening, but we'll get you introduced, and then we would love to talk about what you're doing, Dr. Solomon, and all of the math stuff. So this is exciting. So for our audience, so we introduced ourselves, but I'm Eric. I'm a school psychologist in Connecticut, and I don't know if Rebecca and Rachel want to share that there really quick.
Sure. I think what may be happening, Dr. Solomon, if you have your YouTube open, I think that's where the sound. No, it's not. You're not watching also as you're on in here.
It sounds more like an echo.
I have the StreamYard app open, but that's it.
Okay.
Do you have headphones by chance? That might help.
Okay. And so I'm Rebecca. As I said before, I'm a school psychologist in Florida. I'm currently in a clinical psychology program, working on becoming a clinical psychologist as well. So I'm not currently working as a school psychologist, but as I've recently mentioned on LinkedIn, my school psychology roots are deep, and I think I will always identify as a school psychologist. So that is luck for me. I think, did we lose Dr. Solomon?
I think we lost his his video now.
Okay.
But Eric, do you want to introduce him? And if we can always reschedule if the technology is just not our friend. But yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I'm glad we've got Dr. Solomon here, and hopefully he'll jump right back in. There he is. So Dr. Solomon is on faculty at the University of Albany in New York, SUNY State University of New York at Albany. And prior to Albany was on the faculty at Oklahoma State, where he co-directed the OSU School Psych Center and helped facilitate implementation of statewide RTI, response to intervention. And his primary research interests include experimental methods and statistics, intervention efficiency, instructional time, and curriculum-based measures. And he teaches the assessment sequence as well as academic intervention, and directs New York's Technical Assistance Partnership for Academics at University of Albany, which works closely with the state Department of Education. And recently, there's been some controversy with the Department of Education releasing some new curricular guidelines that have been, I'll say, noted as evidence-based. And there's been some question about whether or not that's actually the case. And Dr. Solomon and some colleagues had launched a petition calling for the retraction of the briefs from New York State, pointing to omissions, misleading claims, and misuse of the term evidence-based, and want to unpack some math myths through their letter and work and connection with the State Department of Education, and highlighting the importance of explicit instruction. So perhaps drawing some parallels to the balanced literacy approach, to maybe, is it called balanced math, or is that sort of the equivalency?
I believe we invented that term.
Okay. Well, welcome, Dr. Solomon. We're all excited to have you here. And I just, in reading some of the information, and I follow Rachel as sort of our curriculum expert. We all sort of have our own little niche. And when Rachel was emailing with you and included us, this was really important and super exciting. But maybe can we start off a little bit just talking about what the state guidelines are doing, and perhaps how they've changed, and where some of the question and concerns are?
Yeah, happily. And thank you, Eric. That was a perfectly accurate description of who I am, and the plight we're dealing with in New York and what I've been up to recently. So next time I need to introduce myself, I'm probably just going to call you because you worded that more concisely than I usually do. So I think New York, in terms of its curriculum standards, is actually probably fairly similar to many of the other states. If we go back to what's called our New York Next Generation standards, which of course guides, practices and content throughout the state, they can be drawn from the NCTM standards, which also sort of have a and Common Core, to focus on things that we might agree with, such as standard algorithms or knowing your basic math facts. But then they also sort of delve into things that may be more problematic. For example, productive struggle, which is basically not using explicit instruction to learn your basic facts, but going through sort of a process of frustration when presented with an unknown math fact, and having kids sort of duke it out before then explaining it to them. Those same standards also emphasize things like multiple strategies, which is another practice that my group has raised significant questions about. Multiple strategies involves teaching students multiple ways to solve a problem up front, rather than going in a linear fashion. And of course, if we think about one-by-one multiplication, which tends to be my go-to example, just because people can relate to it very easily, there are actually several ways to solve a one-by-one multiplication problem. If you're doing mental math, you may want to use some kind of shortcut. That makes perfect sense. But you also need to memorize those facts cold, and if you're drawing to like 2-by-1 multiplication, right, there may be some heuristics you can throw in there that bring you quickly to an answer, but you need to know that standard algorithm pretty quickly, right? Multiplying by the ones, carrying over, bringing the zero down, because that will always work for you. That is a reliable way to solve a 2-by-1 multiplication problem, no matter the situation, even if it's not necessarily in all situations the most efficient go-to means. What we do in multiple strategies is we give kids a number of different strategies, or even have them self-discover their own strategies. And then, sort of like a learning style, if you will. And then say kids can choose the strategy that works for them, which has been shown not to work. Again, there's multiple strategies we can emphasize, but we want to do it in a linear fashion, starting with the standard algorithm. Other practices that may be of concern is the memorization, and this is probably our biggest sticking point, is the memorization of math facts. So it is sort of our group's opinion that math facts should be explicitly memorized. I do that in my own intervention work. I'm going into a school tomorrow to have kids memorize their math facts, especially obviously with basic facts, right? Your basic operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to memorize multi-digit operations. But we emphasize the explicit memorization of math facts, whereas in the New York State Next Generation Standards, they do say knowing your math facts is a good thing, but they say it really should occur through a process of self-discovery, and that explicit memorization should not be emphasized. So those are three three of several contentions we have with the New York Next Generation Standards. And of course, then you have curriculum vendors who logically are trying to align themselves with those standards. So this gives rise to, in our opinion, mediocre curriculums that emphasize things like I just mentioned, productive struggle, multiple strategies. They also tend to rush towards quote unquote applied learning, or sort of rich word problems that students aren't ready for. I actually see this with my own daughters because they're using a curriculum that aligns I believe, pretty closely with what I just described, and they're often rushing to, for example, put in multi-step division word problems that require sort of rich vocabulary and sort of a good understanding of which operations align with what sort of sort of syntactic descriptor within the word problem itself, and they're just not ready for it. That's a level of generalization they can't handle yet, but they rush into that sort of in the initial steps. So you're getting, and they don't know their math facts, so then they're counting on their fingers trying to figure things out as they're trying to figure out what operation to use within the word problem, which they haven't learned yet. So so what you're getting is a lot of kids who are very frustrated with math early on internalize that because it must be their fault. How could the school or the teacher be wrong? And I find actually many teachers are very frustrated by this as well. I've had many teachers contact me within New York out of genuine concern with what they're seeing. And so you're giving rise to a generation of kids that are frustrated with their math skill, have internalized that think they're not good at math or disfluent on math. And now, as Dr. Anastaki would say, my friend from Chalk and Talk, math is relentlessly hierarchical. So once you struggle with your basic operations, there's really no recovery. That it's much like reading, right? If you think about the Matthews effect in reading, we say the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. If you make it to third grade and you're a disfluent reader, unfortunately, you can teach anyone to read at any age, but schools generally don't have the resource to remediate a third grader who's behind. Once you get to that age, you're beyond the typical resources of a school. So it's even earlier in math. So once you skip those basic operations, your 1-by-1 addition facts, your subtraction from 18 facts, and moving forward, you quickly can get off that boat and never recover, and put kids on alternative tracks that really never bring them to the level of algebraic proficiency they really need to be. Our contention in New York wasn't specifically with the curriculum itself. The curriculums and the standards themselves, although we do have concerns with them. They were in relation actually to another layering of guidance by New York State called the New York Numeracy Briefs. And what the New York Numeracy Briefs were recently commissioned. Governor Hochul, obviously the New York State governor, identified concerns with New York's state of literacy and numeracy readiness amongst our children. And that was the right thing to do. Recent standardized test scores, nation's report card scores absolutely show objective levels of underperformance and concern. So she challenged the New York State Education Department to create guidance and processes and protocols that would raise the bar of New York children. And they did that on the literacy side. I'm not super familiar with the initiatives on that side. But on the numeracy side, New York State Education Department took that charge. And as part of that charge, they commissioned 8 briefs, which range from things like assessment to intervention to just general practice, to diversity, equity, inclusion within math instruction. It really spans the gamut, these 8 briefs. And they commissioned a group out of the University of Michigan to write these briefs that complement the New York Next Generation standards and use that as a base, but then sort of describe it in what I think what the goal was practical, concise terminology, layering quote unquote evidence-based practice, quote unquote the state of the science when it comes to math instruction, in a way that teachers could readily digest and transfer into the classroom. And it was those documents we raised concern about, not because we necessarily wanted to, but we had so many people coming to us, especially Dr. Stocky and myself after we did that podcast, that we felt we had an ethical obligation to respond on behalf of the New York teachers and administrators, and parents and school board members. it's run the gamut, who said that they suspected there were problems in the brief, and they would appreciate if we could offer input. And those briefs double down on the practices I just described, and then go much further, essentially arguing for lots of exploratory math practices. They explicitly belittle. That's going to sound funny. they very much belittle the use of explicit instruction. They call it as a process only used for empty vessels, was their exact term. They don't talk about evidence-based math math assessment. They don't refer to curriculum-based measurement. They emphasize productive struggle and multiple strategies, and yeah, they just reinforce a lot of bad math myths that the science of, I think the true science of math, as based on peer-reviewed literature and randomized controlled trials, would suggest would at best result in stagnation, and at worst even further declines. And so that's where we're sort of at now. My group, including Dr. Stocky and Dr. Vanderhayden and Dr. Cotting, Robin Cotting, we got together and we wrote a letter in response to those briefs. We especially highlighted problems with multiple strategies, discovery learning, and their belittling of explicit instruction. And we sent that letter to the New York State Education Department documenting our concerns, and it included a petition signed by over 200 national scholars and leaders, and it was open, and parents and advocates, asking for them to reconsider the briefs. We recently received a letter back from New York State Education Department, to put it nicely, they're declining to reconsider the briefs. So that's where we're at right now.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
The University of Michigan people, where did they come up with this stuff? Is it an intellectual disagreement about the science of math, or are they producers of curricula? How did that even happen?
I'm not sure. I know, not myself personally, but some others that have been aligned with us in this discussion, I think, have inquired of NYSID about where that hire was made. Last time I checked, they hadn't heard anything in response. The group at the University of Michigan is led by Dr. Deborah Ball, and she runs I want to be careful because I don't know the group particularly well, so I don't want to misstate what they do or who's involved. But I believe they do math consultation around the country. So I know Dr. Ball has worked with, I believe she's written the foreword for text by Dr. Joe Bowler before, and I think they historically have been known. Again, I want to be cautious here because I haven't done a full, forensic, analysis of it. I believe they are well known, based on their work in other states, including California, to be strong proponents of these kinds of practices. And based on the work cited in the briefs, one comment we made in our letter about the briefs was that there was only 2 empirical articles and 2 meta-analyses cited across all 8 briefs. And in the response we received back, which Dr. Ball actually was very kind enough she responded personally in the letter. New York State Education Department wrote a piece of the response letter, and to her credit, she thoroughly addressed every concern we had. I strongly disagree with her responses, but that was very respectful and kind of her to do so. Based on her responses, it was clear that she didn't see the peer-reviewed literature as particularly relevant. So if that gives you a sense, I think, of where they're coming from.
I have so many questions and thoughts, and I just and I think that states, and I see this, and I try in my own state in Maryland to kind of be a little bit in the know and to know what's going on. And I do find that I think states in general aren't super transparent when these type of things, like all of a sudden I'll hear, oh, there's a work group that's doing this. And my question will be like, how does one get on the work group? Who are these people that are invited to the work? What are they working? They're redoing this? Like, who knew? So I'm sure that things, get posted on the website, but the websites are often like mazes and things. And so I don't know how this all functions. It seems like a giant machine. And then you have these outside agencies that they consult with and contract with that bring in people and people who know people. And like, it's just very confusing to me. And there seems to be kind of a lack of transparency. And then all of a sudden something's voted on and it's in. And so that kind of sounds like maybe that's where, like, it just seems like it sprung out. I don't know. Did you have any warning that this was in the works, that these briefs were being written? Nothing.
No, I mean, and to their credit, it's not their responsibility to inform me directly. So I don't want to state that there was an advance warning at all. There very well could have been. I'm not in their immediate circle. But I do have a number of contacts in the field at different levels: practitioners, researchers, advocates, journalists. I know a number of people in New York, and we all found out. It seemed like we all found out about it at the same time. I do know that they did solicit feedback from a number of people who I believe they solicited feedback, and I could be wrong. Solicit feedback from across employees within NYSID or contract workers that were directly working with NYSID, and they solicited feedback on the documents before releasing them. What the nature of that feedback was and what pieces of feedback they accepted or didn't accept, I don't know. All I know is what the final product is, which is a set of documents that appear strongly based in someone's personal philosophy about how math instruction should be, which they're entitled to, but doesn't reflect the many hundreds of articles within the science of learning, and then specifically on math assessment and math instruction, that very strong studies that have been represented across the peer-reviewed literature over the last half century. Like I said, they only cited actually 2 meta-analyses, 2 articles, and the rest were books, opinion pieces, and whatnot. So I'm not sure how the final product came to be or what their process was, but so far I haven't been able to get any good insight on reconstructing that. I do know at least 2 people that reached out to me, one an advocate in New York City, and then another Dr. Holly Corby, who does the Bell Ringer, which is a great Substack. They both reached out to New York State Education Department asking for information about that, and as of this time, I don't believe they have heard anything.
I think that I've seen, at least in my state, again, like there's some requirements for like a public comment where they post things and then they open it up for a period. I don't know if that's across states or New York does that, but again, it seems like from my perspective, it's almost like hidden, like it's not well advertised that these things. Yeah. And I feel like there should be an open, this is public education, and I feel that, I don't know, but like you said, I guess nobody is under obligation to consult with us all and reach out, but it just seems icky. Something, talk to the experts.
It does. One thing I talked about with Dr. Stocky on Chalk and Talk is that I do appreciate from a government standpoint how difficult navigating these kinds of situations can be. I sit in the math literature. I sit in the math research, so it seems self-evident to me. Based on I saw the nods of recognition. You 3 are probably very familiar with the science of learning because I said certain things, and obviously there, it clicked there. So for us, I think there's some intuition in it. But if you're working in a government department and this isn't necessarily your zone, and you may be there's other things that are important, not just math instruction. So this may not necessarily be your zone. I can appreciate that it can be very hard to find a group that truly aligns with the science and will promote it in the right way, because it's the wild, wild west, if you will, right? There's a lot of groups out there that would be happy to take this kind of business, regardless of whether they have a history of operating within the science, just like it used to be in literacy, and still to some degree is the case.
It's so sad to me because it seems like there's just a general problem when government agencies get involved in interpreting and implementing evidence-based practices, something happens, and it's just somebody, it turns out to be someone's opinion, maybe someone with a big personality or a lot of money, or the emotional heartstrings of people involved. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's so well baked. We always talk about literacy really being ahead of math, right? Because with literacy, frankly, the science was clarified a half century ago, right? When you look at, the scholars, and whether it be Engelman, or whether it be the various literacy scholars that that sort of from precision instruction or whatever have you, that have sort of clearly shown via demonstrable evidence that they can evoke very, very high rates of learning in reading or math, right? So it's been around for a while, but for whatever reason, literacy became the focal point, and math sort of went off to the side. So we had the reading wars, and then we had all the rigmarole that Emily Hanford talks about in Sold the Story, and that was so she helped broadcast all the research that had been done previously and put it out into a broad audience. And that caught attention, and now you have states, and it's great to see left, right, and you still worry because it can go down, and it can fall apart in a heartbeat. But you're seeing states, left, right, and center sort of align with that research on the importance of evidence-based instruction, of explicit instruction, of phonics-based instruction, of rich vocabulary instruction. But for whatever reason, everyone looks at math and goes, and even though it's the same principles, right? The exact same learning principles that you use to teach reading are the exact same learning principles you use to teach math. Obviously, the content is very different. If you're an expert in reading instruction, that doesn't make you an expert in math instruction, but the underlying premises are the same. But for whatever reason, it seems to me that people picked up on the science of reading, but weren't able to generalize it to the science of math. So math is still sort of this mystic realm where people sort of just I often find throw their hands up in the air and say, well, we don't know math about math instruction. And so you get people who come in and they can say whatever they want, as long as they say it in a very compelling, convincing way, they'll be believed. And I forget who I was talking to who theorized that one reason that might be is because when kids go home, it becomes very apparent to parents if their kid is reading or not. So, if you have a ninth grader and they're illiterate, as a parent, that there's no way that isn't, clear to you. Kids can probably hide math deficits a little bit better. It's not used every day, every minute like reading might be. And so that might also be one reason we've ended up in this space, is because parents don't have a natural sort of as good a detection mechanism for seeing literacy deficits in their kids versus math deficits. They, oftentimes we've gotten used to this culture of, oh, my kid's not a math kid, right? And so, oh, don't worry, he's good with reading, he loves other things, but math just isn't his thing. We've gotten so used to saying that we forget that any kid where math isn't a thing, it's because somewhere down the line they didn't get good instruction and there was a crack that festered to the point that they couldn't keep up with that curriculum anymore. So one thing I think we need to do is broaden, as you guys are doing right now, broaden awareness of math deficits, treating them like reading deficits, and making people aware that the exact same way we patched up reading, or in the process of, is the exact same way we can patch up math. And that the same principles apply. So when people start talking about sort of odd things in math, like discovery learning, premature discovery learning, or multiple strategies, or another big one that I didn't mention up front is, and Robin Cotting's done great work on this, the myth of math anxiety. Right? Math anxiety is not a genetically inherited trait. Kids can be very anxious about math. That is very true, but it's not because of the time test. It's not because of the intensity of instruction. It's because they've gotten very poor instruction in the past. So naturally they find it aversive now. So we tend to sort of have this myth now that kids have math anxiety, and for those kids we should sort of lower standards or not engage in time tests with them, which is the exact opposite thing we should be doing. We've sort of gotten into this culture where all these things are okay and all these practices are okay, even though if we inserted them into the reading world, everyone would go, wait a minute, that makes no sense at all. So I'm hoping we can use reading as a bridge to math, because the principles of learning are the same.
I see that in my own school, who has recently, in the last like 2 years, switched over to a curriculum that's kind of embracing the science of reading. But the math department will still come in and say, well, that's the I do, we do, you do. That's a reading thing. We use an upside down model for math. We flip it around. It's, the kid goes off and does it first. And then if they need it, then maybe we might come in. And I'm just like, they do not see that parallel at all.
That's an exact example of what I'm describing. I see that everywhere. And again, we're seeing it in the curriculums, right? We're seeing, obviously there's a lot of literacy curriculums out there, and some are still bad. So I don't want to overstate our success in solving that problem. But generally speaking, you're starting to see a sway where there's a lot of scrutiny of reading curriculums, and vendors respond to things that may, pose a risk to their profit margin. So you see them starting to bend over to that science. But in math, you're seeing you're seeing the reverse. You're seeing them double down on these fancy words and these quote unquote innovative practices. But there's no acknowledgement of so they've been backing off that science as it's been described in the literature more recently, and that upside down model you described is a great example of it. So unfortunately, we're sort of going in the opposite direction with it right now. There's actually very few math curriculums that I can possibly endorse. You're starting to see a growing number of reading curriculums. I can, if I had to, I could. The reading curriculums that I regularly endorse, I could, it takes more than one hand, right? But in math, I can only endorse really 2 or 3 of them, because the others are doubling down on these funny practices.
I think it was in the Post article, and you mentioned also that that part of their rationale, New York State's rationale for these new guidelines for moving away from time test was equity and inclusion. Where did that come? Why? How did they say that? That doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Because this, literally, when you said that, my heart started beating faster. Because it gets a little personal there. What they did in the briefs was they doubled down on lots of language about diversity, equity, inclusion. And so they talked about, all these practices, how that they're describing that the reason they work is because they work specifically well, for example, minoritized populations, and they brought up lots of examples within the briefs that included fictitious minority students. And the reason I found that particularly frustrating was because it serves as a veil. It makes it look like the practices are particularly well justified because you've enriched the language with common words used within the diversity, equity, and inclusion research fields. So what you're doing is you're taking bad practices, and I think the exact words I used in a recent article for the Center for Academic Progress Substack was they're dressing the briefs up in DEI language. So what you're doing is you're taking practices that are completely not aligned at all with science, but you're painting them over, you're glossing them over with a layer of DEI language in the hopes that will convince people that they are evidence-based practices, because now they have a face validity to them. And that sort of hurt, because I'm looking at these practices that are emphasized in these briefs, and based on the research we have, there's good reason to believe that they will not be particularly well suited for minoritized populations, In reverse, they will probably increase disproportionality. The students that the families that can't afford private tutoring on the side, the families that don't have sort of rich, academic environments through sort of generational momentum, they're the ones that are probably going to get hurt the most from the recommendations put in these briefs. Science has shown, for example, that explicit instruction, when done well, right, can reduce disproportionality. It can close achievement gaps. Explicit instruction is a fundamental element of DEI as it applies to education. It is not the only element for sure, but it is a fundamental element. So the fact that they were using that language to dress up, in my opinion, bad practices, again, that, because this is my passion, right? These practices are going to affect kids in really, really significant ways. So to see them use that language to dress up bad practices was very frustrating.
I did, and I was. Go ahead, Eric. Go.
Oh, sorry. I just, it makes me think when things go south, then all of this bad practice is sort of, encoded with sort of DEI, language, and then I think people use that, or perhaps use that as a one more thing to say, well, see, DEI isn't a good thing too, right? So we entangle these things, and then rather than saying it's the bad practice, we're going to blame something else, or it's shameful, I guess, in that respect, to me. But you're right. Good instruction is good instruction for all kids. We need to embrace that, and that will especially help our students from minoritized populations.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk, there are aspects where there are specifics about DEI that are pretty fundamental, right? When we talk about, for example, representation of different race and ethnicities within our curriculum books, absolutely, right? When we talk about school, home connections, and how we can, cross cultural barriers to communicate with parents and get an alignment and create a supportive school community, 100%. But as you just pointed out, Eric, when we talk about fundamental learning principles, the science has shown kids may learn at different rates. Every kid learns different things at different rates, but the principles by which you improve their learning are the same across kids. So that's the base. So you can't play with that base. Otherwise, you're in an unscientific arena, and you're ripe for bad outcomes.
So as I was kind of reading, and I was following earlier, the things in California, and reading up on Joe Bowler and things, and I found a lot of. I know there's some critical from Stanford, from like the student newspaper there that kind of mocks her and doesn't like her and calls her like the woke professor. So there's some like entanglement of, and usually when I hear people like online, negatively calling somebody woke, it's like this kind of conservative bunch, mocking a more liberal, and then, and seems uncalled for, and I'm a more liberal-minded person. But in this case, as I dug into it, I thought it was interesting that it seemed like kind of a conservative student body was mocking her as this woke professor, but at the same time, she's not supporting evidence-based practices and whatnot, which has been my kind of opposite when I'm looking at how healthcare is going right now. I see kind of more conservatives not following evidence, not following science. And here it seems like a little bit switched, in that you have these groups that are writing these briefs on DEI, but also not following the science, when, it's been kind of the opposite. And I noticed in reading some of the articles that, were quoting you and whatnot, there, I think, was a conservative group that kind of came to fight on your side, correct? Am I understanding that? It's just kind of opposite of what I've been experiencing with evidence and science. So I just thought that was interesting. Is that correct? Or
You are spot on. So there was actually a conservative group, and so no, let me restate that. there was someone came forward to assist me, and she was affiliated with a conservative group. And I guess that's what she's, she does a lot of educational advocacy. Frankly, I agree with her on many of her positions when it comes to educational advocacy. And she historically has been tied to a conservative group. So she helped me in broadcasting the message. She put it on her Substack. Daniela Egorov is actually her name. I think she deserves recognition for the work she's done. So yeah, she promoted my petition and letter on her Substack, and I know she was talking about it, and she helped me, get to bigger communities to make people aware of this. When I sent my letter and I got my response back from NYSID, I was disappointed because one of the first things they pointed out in the response letter was, you worked with a conservative group. You shouldn't have done that. And I was pretty floored by that, because I'd like to think that educational outcomes are bipartisan. If there's one thing that still remains bipartisan, good Lord, it's education. It's got to be educational outcomes. And so I was taken aback that in their letter, before they even talked about with the content of my briefs, they pointed out that I had worked with someone affiliated with this conservative institute. So there is a entanglement there that is very unfortunate. And to your point about the woke professor, I actually saw something similar in my New York Post article, because the New York Post reached out to me. Let's be honest, they are historically a conservative newspaper, but the journalist I worked with was very respectful, was earnestly interested in what I was saying, and wanted, and felt it was worthy news. So he was working through, he put out a great article, but then I noticed in the comments people were talking about the same thing, like, oh, here's woke education again. It's the woke. And I'm like, no. Let's keep them apart. This has nothing to do with wokeness. You can have your own opinion on that. I don't want to go there. But this isn't about wokeness. This is about science versus unscientific practices at play. This shouldn't have any affiliation with more partisan politics. And with Joe Bowler, I unfortunately I think it's the same thing. I've never met Joe Bowler, but I based on her literature, I would say we probably disagree on a number of things as it relates to math assessment and math instruction. But yeah, I think because of their use of diversity, equity, inclusion language, which I would say is more compensatory, right? It's a way to establish validity where you otherwise can't. Because they keep using that, now people it's almost like Pavlov, right? It's like a neutral stimulus. Now it gets affiliated with sort of this woke movement when it has nothing to do with it at all. They're completely separate issues.
And I'm wondering too if maybe this type of topic, because I've been thinking like, why am I seeing that kind of a little bit of a switch? And yes, I agree. It shouldn't, evidence-based practices in education and healthcare, should be evidence. Science should be its own thing. It shouldn't be a partisan thing. But I've just been pondering about kind of how I typically feel I see that play out and how that is now. And I've wondered, is some of this because some of this math stuff and this return to explicit instruction is kind of a return to an old school approach, right? That kids would sit and drill and do that. And maybe that's kind of appealing to conservatives more so. I don't know if it really matters one way or the other, the why, but I've just wondered if maybe it's looked at as an older kind of practice, like back in my day, this is how it used to be. And so I want to return to that. And maybe that's fueling some of that affinity there.
Yeah, we could spend days talking about the relationship between sort of politics and education and how different belief structures within each, through the government process contribute to real practices on the ground. I would agree with you that some of it, to use, I think the most common term is a back to basics kind of mentality, right? I learned I had to recite my math facts as kids, as a kid, and look how, and I know my math facts, and so, all you hullabaloo in your weird innovation, you should have done it my way the whole time. And there is a kernel of truth in that. If you talk to boomers, they do tend to know their math facts. But with that said, I also hesitate to call it a back to basics initiative. It's not. We have learned a lot of things in the last half century about how to execute high quality instruction that optimizes learning outcomes for all students, whether it be in the instructional domain or whether it be in the assessment domain. So there is an evolving science, revolving, multi-tiered systems of support that we need to consider. So yes, there are lessons from from how instruction used to be done that, frankly, they had it right back then, but not all of it. So, like I said, I like to avoid the term back to basics because there's many things we've learned, many things have changed, but there absolutely is a kernel to truth to that. The other thing, Sir Nick Gibb, who wrote Reforming Lessons. He was the UK. I'm going to butcher this. I apologize. I think he was the former Minister of Education in the UK. I don't know if that's the exact title, but it's something akin to that. He's a conservative who helped turn around the UK system and brought their, I believe, I don't know if it was the PISA, but brought their international test scores up significantly within a very short period of time. And in his book, he describes, and you can see sort of some of the conservative mentality come out. He described what his key decision points were in creating a system that emphasized high quality literacy and high quality math. And part of it was indeed going back to sort of a back to basics kind of approach in certain respects. But another part of it was, and I think people can agree or disagree with this, he had a stronger hand in deciding what assessments teachers were going to do, what curriculums they were going to use, what content was being represented. When all those decisions are left up to local educational agencies, you can get some great practices from corners that have good people, but you can also get a lot of very strange practices. And I think in New York State Education Department, if you look at the sheer scope of the New York State Education Department, it is a very large bureaucracy, right? Where you have tons of decision makers, and so you sort of have this perpetual wheel going on. And one thing he did was he basically created a committee of people to investigate what the best practices in math were. They answered to him. He made key decisions, and he centralized a lot of the decision making in terms of what's a high quality curriculum, what kinds of assessments should we have. Every kid should know their times tables in third grade. I'm saying so. And that sort of kind of executive decisions that I think can be abused if it goes off the handle. I'm not saying it's all strengths. That kind of executive decision making was super critical to him creating an overall better quality system. And I think you start seeing that in conservative states too, right? We're talking about you have the, I know they hate it when it's called this, and they're right, the Mississippi Miracle, right? Because it wasn't a miracle. They worked very hard to get it. But you see that turnaround in Mississippi. Now you're seeing the turnaround in other southern states. And I think part of the reason they can do that is because they have a government structure, for better or for worse, at least as it comes to education, allows for quicker decision making and centralization once you have good practices in play. I'm helping Texas now. I'm consulting with Texas as they develop some sort of post-graduation teacher institutes, if you will. They're having these institutes that teachers will be required to go through that will help, that will provide professional development in evidence-based math instruction. And every teacher in Texas has to do this by, I think within X amount of years, they're going to have to go through one of these institutes. And I'm hearing language from I don't know the Texas educational system. I'm not going to, talk about whether they're, I'm just working with them on math. But at least within math, I'm finding the people I'm working with do really know their stuff. And they're laser focused on the right domains in terms of who, in terms of what kids should be learning and how kids should be learning it. And via the fact that they called me and a dozen other math experts around the country to supply diverse opinions leads me to believe they're on the right track. Because I can't confirm, I don't think New York did that. I think they had an internal mechanism. Rachel, as you were describing before, they had an internal mechanism and they reached out to University of Michigan, and it just went with it. So there are practices I'm seeing coming out of historically conservative people or bodies that, for whatever reason, is lending itself well to better adaptability in terms of pivoting towards evidence-based instruction. I want to say that within a limited sense, but I do see that, yeah.
So is that what you would like to see from New York State or more states, more of a kind of peer review for making these policy and curricular decisions? You think that would be effective?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can go both ways. There's risk on either side, but I think as I've looked across states, yes, I think there needs to be better control over curriculum and then a peer-reviewed process, as I think you, Rebecca, you described quite well. There needs to be a peer review process to select a curriculum or a short stack of curriculums that are acceptable and aligned with the science. And critically, those peers need to have a diverse body of peers that represent different aspects of the field, so you make sure you get the right voices in the room. Because I think it's very hard for government to pick the right people, because if they needed, the reason they're picking the right people is because they don't know. And I'm not saying they should necessarily know. Like I said, they serve many functions. There's many things about state educational law I know nothing about. So, but I think they need to do a better job of casting a broad net and bringing experts in to provide guidance on the nature of the training teachers get and the curriculums that are chosen. In New York, we are doing a bit of that. For example, like many other states, in New York City, they've created a short order of literacy curriculums that schools can pick from. New York City, I know, made a decision to pick a very specific math curriculum that is going south, from what I've been told. So it can go either way. I know Emily Hanford, in one of her more recent Sold a Story podcasts, talks about situations where when states rush to create short lists of approved curriculums, you can leave out really great curriculums that maybe have been used for many years quite successfully in quiet corners of the state. So you need to do this with exceeding caution. But yes, I think there needs to be greater oversight of the kinds of curriculums that are selected, which is going to also guide the vendors, right? The vendors are responding to what the demands of their populations are. So if all of a sudden New York says, hey, you weren't on our top list of 5 because you didn't have X, Y, and Z, then next year they will have X, Y, and Z.
Makes sense. Eric, go ahead. You were going in.
I was just going to say, we have a couple of questions in our chat, and it makes me think, applying this to school psychologists, how can we advocate better? That's my first question. What are some ways we can petition the State Department of Ed to do better and be more evidence-based? And then one of our audience members asked a similar question: how can we help teachers understand that our math computer programs may not have good positive effect size, and struggling students need direct instruction and intervention?
I wish I had a great answer for that. I actually just spent a great hour talking to 2 board members from a from a moderately sized New York City who asked me the exact same questions. It's difficult. I think it helps to point people to the right resources. There are not a lot of great resources for that describe the science of math instruction in a sort of a consumer friendly way. I think Chalk and Talk is probably the best resource out there right now. Anna Stockey has brought. I mean, I was on it twice, so I don't want to make it. I'm obviously a little biased, but using those episodes as sort of pinpoints for discussion about what practices should be in schools, because she breaks it down very clearly in terms of what should be done, I think is a great resource for creating discussion around school boards or within school meetings about just about how practice can pivot. Another good book, sorry, I have it on my desk. Has anyone seen Instructional Illusions? Oh, that's another great book that just came out from Kirshner, Hendrick, and Heel. Three excellent, I believe they're all three of them are educational psychologists, but don't quote me. And they designed a book that's that's designed to be very consumer friendly in describing common illusions in instruction. And I think they talk about the innovation myth, right? That we're always trying to innovate on good practice on other practices because it's science. So shouldn't we always be innovating? It's not, it's not physics. Not every it doesn't go in incremental leaps. So that's another resource I notice a number of people are picking up and bringing into their schools to form a discussion. Zach Rochelle's podcast, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and his associated book, Just Tell Them. That's another very consumer-friendly text and podcast that I think can be brought right into discussions. So those are some materials that I would use. As far as the actual process, I try to be very cautious about telling administrators and teachers to hold up their signs and go around the school because I know their jobs are at stake. So I want to be very careful about recommending admin and staff and faculty engage in just outright advocacy because there can be complications. It's easier for me. I'm a tenured professor, right? So one of the reasons I decided I wanted to write that letter is I knew I had a little bit. It was still a little risky for what it's worth, but I knew I had a little bit higher level of security, and so if anyone was going to write that letter, it probably should be my responsibility. But if you're a parent or a school board member, it's a different ballgame. I think if there's going to be serious changes that come, it has to come from parents because your voters at the school board level, your voters at the elected official level in terms of state Congress and leadership. And if you're loud enough, people will, and centralized, people will pay attention to you. This actually is a pretty good political bit, for someone to take on at a higher level. So I do believe in parent advocacy, just like it was in reading, that grassroots parent advocacy could be the key here to pushing some of these practices through. There's a number of excellent parental advocacy agencies in New York that have been helping me with this, and frankly, they seem to have the strongest connections in.
That's hopeful. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm just thinking about how I'm wondering, I guess, and I don't want to go backwards because I think what we can do and how we can advocate is an important place to kind of, focus at the end of our conversation here. But I do wonder, what do you think will happen if this, like over time, what do you predict will happen to kids' numeracy in New York State?
I hope good things. First and foremost, I hope very good things. So, I think it depends. And I hope I'm horrifically wrong. I'll be the first to be thrilled if I'm wrong. But if these briefs are adopted literally, in the way they were written, and the practices really are as they're written are implemented as described, I think the best we can assume is stagnation. So yeah, if you look at, for example, Nick Gibb and what he did in UK, and so you think about, okay, what does it take to really turn around math scores within a generation? We're doing things very, very different than what he did, in his role. So if described, I think the best we can hope for is stagnation, but I am optimistic. This is a ongoing discussion. These are not ever permanent things, right? We're having a dialogue about this. People are listening. So, and science over time is self-correcting, which is the beauty of it. So I'm hoping over time that we'll pivot to better practices, and there will be better outcomes. And you're starting to see whispers of it nationally, I think. Not necessarily in New York, but there are, at least statewide. Obviously, there's schools in New York that are doing an outstanding job. But you are starting to see whispers of it nationally. Again, in terms of, what I was talking about, my work in Texas, in terms of some of the other states within the quote unquote Southern Surge, you're starting to see them identify key practices and start implementing them. So you're starting to see murmurings there. You're starting to see greater attention on social media. Again, from, for example, from Anna Stocky and Zach Rochelle, who are really broadcasting key messages as they relate to good math instruction. So I'm optimistic that over time we can right this boat. But at least if you want to look on the very, very short distance, it's not good.
Okay, well, I there's a lot to be hopeful for, and I hope that we can. If you asked me like years ago about the reading situation, I was totally despondent, and my district was stooped in F&B nonsense, and Eric and Rebecca were just making fun of me all the time because I would talk to them online and be like, "That's me," and they just knew that it was like a trigger for me. And now it's not in my district anymore because of the advocacy that's going on. So we can hope that something similar.
And this is New York. A lot of those bad practices emerged out of our state. Literacy. Right? I'm not naming names, but there's one of the programs that was mentioned in Sold the Story originated out of New York. So, but even the reason I bring it up is because even New York, even though they're a little slower than other states to pivot, they are pivoting. You can see that boat start turning around on the literacy side. So, Rachel, just like you said, yes, we're in an extreme now, but it's still open waters. There's nothing is set in stone yet. So I think as long as we keep advocating and to the best of our abilities and keep discussing these things with different audiences, opportunities will emerge to improve the practices and policies.
And I hope that in the future, maybe we are listening into an Emily Hanford podcast on math and you're being interviewed. But thank you for your advocacy and the fight that you're fighting. And any last things about, petitions or anything that in particular that people in New York or people outside of New York can do to support? Or is it just kind of continuing to speak up when we can?
Well, yes. But also, so I already sent my letter into New York State Education Department. I mentioned they sent back a response, but actually I still think people should sign the petition. We kept it up. And I think the more names that sign it, the more they have the link. So I suspect they may be checking it more than once. It shows that this is not going away and it's an ongoing concern and they need to address it. So I don't know how you want me to share that link or whether you can share it later with your audience, but I'm happy to supply it, and I would definitely encourage people to continue to sign it.
For sure, yeah, we'll get it out there. I'm sure I have it somewhere, and I'll put it into the chat here, and we'll put it on the episode for sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Eric, Rebecca. Any last minute things?
Just a big thank you. This was fantastic. We appreciate what you're doing and your time this evening.
Oh, thank you. It's very mutual. So I appreciate you having me. I'm sorry for coming on a few minutes late,
Oh,
but
no worries.
but yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. You're obviously a critical part of that advocacy which we just described. So keep doing the great work, and hopefully I'll see you in the real world someday.
Sounds good. Thanks. Good night,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you.